L.J. Barnes, Youth Service in an English County, a report prepared for King George's Jubilee Trust, London, 1945. Is it too pessimistic to fear that a generation grown up under these conditions is unlikely to throw off the fetters to which it has grown used? Or does this description not rather fully bear out de Tocqueville's prediction of the new kind of servitude when, after having thus successively taken each member of the community in its powerful grasp and fashioned him at will, the supreme power then extends its arm over the whole community? It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate to rise above the crowd. The will of man is not shattered, but softened, bent, and guided. Men are seldom forced by it to act, but they are constantly restrained from acting. Such a power does not destroy, but it prevents existence. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people, till each nation is reduced to be nothing better than a flock of timid and industrial animals, of which government is the shepherd. I have always thought that servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereignty of the people. Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, Part 2, Book 4, Chapter 6. The whole chapter should be read in order to realize with what acute insight de Tocqueville was able to foresee the psychological effects of the modern welfare state. It was, incidentally, de Tocqueville's frequent reference to the new servitude which suggested the title of the present book. What de Tocqueville did not consider was how long such a government would remain in the hands of benevolent despots, when it would be so much more easy for any group of ruffians to keep itself indefinitely in power by disregarding all the traditional decencies of political life. Perhaps I should also remind the reader that I have never accused the socialist parties of deliberately aiming at a totalitarian regime, or even suspected that the leaders of the old socialist movements might ever show such inclinations. What I have argued in this book, and what the British experience convinces me even more to be true, is that the unforeseen but inevitable consequences of socialist planning create a state of affairs in which, if the policy is to be pursued, totalitarian forces will get the upper hand. I explicitly stress that socialism can be put into practice only by methods of which most socialists disapprove, and even add that, in this, the old socialist parties were inhibited by their democratic ideals, and that they did not possess the ruthlessness required for the performance of their chosen task. I am afraid the impression one gained under the Labour government was that these inhibitions were, if anything, weaker among the British socialists than they had been among their German fellow socialists 25 years earlier. Certainly, the German Social Democrats, in the comparable period of the 1920s, under equally or more difficult economic conditions, never approached as closely to totalitarian planning as the British Labour government has done. Since I cannot here examine the effect of these policies in detail, I will rather quote the summary judgments of other observers who may be less suspect of preconceived opinions. Some of the most damning, in fact, come from men who not long before had themselves been members of the Labour Party. Thus, Mr. Ivor Thomas, in a book apparently intended to explain why he left that party, comes to the conclusion that, from the point of view of fundamental human liberties, there is little to choose between communism, socialism, and National Socialism. They all are examples of the collectivist or totalitarian state. In its essentials, not only is completed socialism the same as communism, but it hardly differs from fascism. The Socialist Tragedy, London, Latimer House Limited, 1949, pages 241 and 242. The most serious development is the growth of a measure of arbitrary administrative coercion and the progressive destruction of the cherished foundation of British liberty, the rule of law. for exactly the reasons here discussed in Chapter 6. This process had, of course, started long before the last Labour government came into power, and had been accentuated by the war. But the attempts at economic planning under the Labour government carried it to a point which makes it doubtful whether it can be said that the rule of law still prevails in Britain. The new despotism, of which a Lord Chief Justice had warned Britain as long as 25 years ago, is, as The Economist recently observed, no longer a mere danger, but an established fact. In an article in the issue of June 19, 1954, discussing the report on the public inquiry ordered by the Minister of Agriculture into the disposal of land at Critchell Down, Command 9176, London, Her Majesty's Stationery Office, 1954, a document deserving the most careful study by all those interested in the psychology of a planning bureaucracy. It is a despotism exercised by a thoroughly conscientious and honest bureaucracy for what they sincerely believe is the good of the country. But it is, nevertheless, an arbitrary government, in practice free from effective parliamentary control, and its machinery would be as effective for any other than the beneficent purposes for which it is now used. I doubt whether it was much exaggerated when recently an eminent British jurist, in a careful analysis of these trends, came to the conclusions that in Britain today we live on the edge of dictatorship. Transition would be easy, swift, and it could be accomplished with complete legality. Already so many steps have been taken in this direction, due to the completeness of power possessed by the government of the day, and the absence of any real check, such as the terms of a written constitution or the existence of an effective second chamber, that those still to be taken are small in comparison. G. W. Keaton, The Passing of Parliament, London, 1952. For a more detailed analysis of the economic policies of the British Labour government and its consequences, I cannot do better than refer the reader to Professor John Jukes's Ordeal by Planning, London, Macmillan and Company, 1948. It is the best discussion known to me of a concrete instance of the phenomena discussed in general terms in this book. It supplements it better than anything I could add here, and spells out a lesson which is of significance far beyond Great Britain. It seems now unlikely that, even when another Labour government should come into power in Great Britain, it would resume the experiments in large-scale nationalization and planning. But in Britain, as elsewhere in the world, the defeat of the onslaught of systematic socialism has merely given those who are anxious to preserve freedom a breathing space in which to re-examine our ambitions and to discard all those parts of the socialist inheritance which are a danger to a free society. Without such a revised conception of our social aims, we are likely to continue to drift in the same direction in which outright socialism would merely have carried us a little faster. F. A. Hayek. Preface. When a professional student of social affairs writes a political book, his first duty is plainly to say so. This is a political book. I do not wish to disguise this by describing it, as I might perhaps have done, by the more elegant and ambitious name of an essay in social philosophy. But whatever the name, the essential point remains that all I shall have to say is derived from certain ultimate values. I hope I have adequately discharged in the book itself a second and no less important duty, to make it clear beyond doubt what these ultimate values are on which the whole argument depends. There is, however, one thing I want to add to this. Though this is a political book, I am as certain as anyone can be that the beliefs set out in it are not determined by my personal interests. I can discover no reason why the kind of society which seems to me desirable should offer greater advantages to me than to the great majority of the people of my country. In fact, I am always told by my socialist colleagues that, as an economist, I should occupy a much more important position in the kind of society to which I am opposed, provided, of course, that I could bring myself to accept their views. I feel equally certain that my opposition to these views is not due to their being different from those with which I have grown up, since they are the very views which I held as a young man, and which have led me to make the study of economics my profession. For those who, in the current fashion, seek interested motives in every profession of a political opinion, I may, perhaps, be allowed to add that I have every possible reason for not writing or publishing this book. It is certain to offend many people with whom I wish to live on friendly terms. It has forced me to put aside work for which I feel better qualified, and to which I attach greater importance in the long run. And above all, it is certain to prejudice the reception of the results of the more strictly academic work, to which all my inclinations lead me. If, in spite of this, I have come to regard the writing of this book as a duty which I must not evade, this was mainly due to a peculiar and serious feature of the discussions of problems of future economic policy at the present time, of which the public is scarcely sufficiently aware. This is the fact that the majority of economists have now for some years been absorbed by the war machine and silenced by their official positions, and that, in consequence, public opinion on these problems is to an alarming extent guided by amateurs and cranks, by people who have an axe to grind or a pet panacea to sell. In these circumstances, one who still has the leisure for literary work is hardly entitled to keep to himself apprehensions which current tendencies must create in the minds of many who cannot publicly express them, though in different circumstances I should have gladly left the discussion of questions of national policy to those who are both better authorized and better qualified for the task. The central argument of this book was first sketched in an article entitled Freedom and the Economic System, which appeared in the Contemporary Review for April 1938, and was later reprinted in an enlarged form as one of the public policy pamphlets edited by Professor H.D. Gideons for the University of Chicago Press, 1939. I have to thank the editors and publishers of both these publications for permission to reproduce certain passages from them. F. A. Hayek. Preface, 1976. This book, written in my spare time from 1940 to 1943, while my mind was still mainly occupied with problems of pure economic theory, has unexpectedly become for me the starting point of more than 30 years' work in a new field. This first attempt in the new direction was caused by my annoyance with the complete misinterpretation in English progressive circles of the character of the Nazi movement, an annoyance which led me from a memorandum to the then director of the London School of Economics, Sir William Beveridge, through an article in the Contemporary Review for 1938, which, at the request of Professor Harry G. Gideons of the University of Chicago, I enlarged for publication in his public policy pamphlets, and which, finally and reluctantly, when I found that all my more competent British colleagues were preoccupied with more urgent problems of the conduct of the war, I expanded into this tract for the Times. In spite of the wholly unexpected success of the book, in the case of the initially not contemplated American edition, even greater than in that of the British one, I felt for a long time not altogether happy about it. Though I had frankly declared at the outset of the book that it was a political one, I was made to feel by most of my fellow social scientists that I had used my abilities on the wrong side, and I was myself uncomfortable about the possibility that, in going beyond technical economics, I might have exceeded my competence. I will not speak here about the fury which the book caused in certain circles, or of the curious difference between its reception in Great Britain and that in the United States. About that I did say something 20 years ago in the preface to the first American paperback edition. Just to indicate the character of a widespread reaction, I will mention merely that one well-known philosopher, who shall be nameless, wrote to another to reproach him for having lauded this scandalous book, which, of course, he had not read. But though I tried hard to get back to economics proper, I could not free myself of the feeling that the problems on which I had so undesignedly embarked were more challenging and important than those of economic theory, and that much that I had said in my first sketch needed clarification and elaboration.